Hello and welcome, everybody. It is Friday, June 30th, and you have arrived at the Friday broadcast of Talk About Your Community. My name is Todd Nilsson. I'm your host. This is a show about building communities online, offline, and actually all the things in between, the hybrids. I like to bring on a variety of guests from a lot of different kinds of backgrounds, disciplines, ideas, interests, and learn about how they interact with communities, how they build their communities, and what we can do, what lessons we can take from that as we bring them back to our own communities in which we are active in. I hope that you all had a great week. It's been a busy one here. I've brought on some new customers that I've been working with through Clocktower Advisors. And if you are in a position where you're looking for some help or some feedback or ideas about building your own online communities, I encourage you to reach out to me. You can learn more about our company at clocktoweradvisors.com. But we're here to talk to guests today. So I've been really looking forward to having my next guest on. She's doing some amazing research in the area of running communities. And her name is Martina Pocchiari. Sorry, Martina Pocchiari. We just went over this before the show, and I knew I was going to do that. Anyways, she's absolutely wonderful, and she has written a research piece in conjunction with Professor Jason Roos. The topic of the research is the effect of digitizing community activities on community participation. And this is evidence that's drawn from meetup.com. I think that just some great applicable research to those of us that are in the community management space. So why don't you please welcome me welcome Martina and join me as we talk a little bit about this. Those of you that are tuning in on the live stream, please add your questions, comments, ideas as we go along. This is a live interactive session. And if you happen to see this on the replay, add your questions as well. I try to respond to everyone that puts things out there. And Martina, do you object to me sharing a link to the paper up on the chat after the session for anyone that's interested in it?
If anybody's interested, they can reach out to me via my website. So maybe you can put the link to the website, and I can share privately a draft of the paper.
I will happily do that. That sounds terrific.
Thank you.
So, Martina, how did you get interested in online communities, and what gave you the idea for this particular research project?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me as a guest to your show. It's a really great opportunity for me to speak to you and to communicate with industry and community managers directly. I have always been a community member myself. Ever since I was very young, I like to be a part of online communities about music or about art, about, I don't know, digital products. So I've always been a very active member of online communities. And growing up, so being an active member, I noticed some phenomena that were interesting to me, but that I could not fully explain, like why did some members have so much influence on the dynamics and on the conversations that were happening in the communities that I was part of. Mm-hmm. Or what would happen if something related to the community that I was in happened in the external world, like a news or like a prize or like a bad event, that would happen externally. What would happen to the dynamics that instead I would observe in the online community? And so all of these questions came from my direct experience being a community member, and I am very lucky to be able to study them as a researcher. Indeed, these are the topics that I study currently in my research projects.
Well, and it's amazing. So I ran into you. There's a Slack channel for CMX, which is a place where I think a watering hole where a lot of community managers hang out. And you had posted, I think, a link up to your research project there, which was where I met you. So grateful to have you as a researcher, as an analyst in that space, sharing your findings and your ideas with us, because I think we need so much of that. I was saying to you before the stream today, how rare it is to get a good quantitative data around how communities work. There's plenty of qualitative data. There's plenty of interpretive data. There's plenty of experiential data from those of us that are living communities day to day. But to be able to abstract that into some lessons we can take away is so incredible. And so thank you for doing what you do. I want to hear more about your research.
Yeah, of course. So I'm also really happy to when I'm able to share some of the findings. First, because it takes a long time to create them, and to have enough statistical confidence to share some insights with the people who helped me, because the people in the CMX Slack were some of the people that really helped me to ground my work into practical relevance. And so the one that I shared there is indeed the paper with Dr. Roos, who is also my PhD advisor. And we study specifically what happens to the participation rates in communities when community managers decide to bring their activities more and more into digitized formats. So what we are having today, live chats or webinars, webcasts, even like Slack conversations. So all these different digitized formats, they have become more and more popular over the past few years, not just during COVID, but they were already gaining more popularity before COVID. And so, the idea started actually before COVID, and it just happened that we noticed that managers were offering more of these digitized experiences to their members. We know that by now we know that these digitized experiences are very convenient. They can be cheaper to organize. It's more convenient to access them as members. But from existing research in community management, and I guess also you can confirm if this is also the case from experience, people participate in communities because they like to make connections, to create these meaningful social connections with others that are similar to them, that can understand where they're coming from and what their objectives are. And sometimes these highly digitized formats for human interactions, they cannot always deliver these social and psychological benefits. That's how they're called in marketing literature.
In very simple terms, that would be something like Zoom fatigue that we all experience, right? It's just not as immersive. It's very easy to disconnect from it and just to tune out and not pay attention.
Exactly. Yeah, there are many advantages to using these kind of digitized interactions, but there are also very heavy drawbacks. And so the question at the heart of the paper is, well, what happens, when managers offer these digitized activities? Do people participate more because it's more convenient and it's easier and it's cheaper? Or do they participate relatively less than when they are offered in-person experiences, because they can just extract different and more value from interacting in person? Mm-hmm. And so some insights that we were able to find so far are that on average, and we study a large data set with, 12,000 communities from 33 categories of interest, about 180,000 events, some of which are digitized and some of which are in person.
Wow.
So a large data set. We were able to see that on average, across all of these observations, the effect of digitizing community activities is on average negative. So there is this harm to participation in digitizing community activities. But probably the most important insight that we can offer is this effect is very, very heterogeneous, and it heavily depends on the kind of community that you're managing, what kind of shared interest your members have. If it is more, for example, around sports, around outdoor adventures, or about technology, what is the interest at heart of your community, and what are the characteristics of the activity that you're organizing. These two features are really the drivers of whether the impacts of digitization will be positive or negative, and how positive or how negative will it be for participation.
So for instance, if it's a developer community that's used to doing everything virtually, there may not be as much of a negative impact as there would be on a group of outdoors enthusiasts that are forced to do a digital activity. Got it. Okay, That makes sense.
And so, we quantify exactly by how much. So how different is the impact of digitizing activities on these two extreme categories of communities. And based on prior literature and on psychological dynamics and on phenomena that are, have been explored in psychological literature, we know more or less about why. Why is that, for example, that developers versus people who are interested in outdoor adventures might be less impacted by this average negative effect of digitization. And there are a few explanations, like the familiarity that they have with the event format. So developers are may already be familiar enough with the digitized environments, with the tools, so they may not react so negatively to a change in the communication formats as people who are instead in outdoor adventure communities. And so this is one. And another factor is the amount of information that you can share with your members up front. So maybe developer communities, they're more used to give more details about what the digitized event will be. We're going to do exactly this with exactly this timing, with exactly these formats and this software. And so people are a bit less uncertain about what they can expect from this kind of experience than people instead, for example, in the outdoor adventure category. Where instead it might be also a little bit hard for the organizers to exactly give a lot of information about it up front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We had a question actually that comes in on the chat from Jenny Wagle. Hi, Jenny, good to see you. And hello, other person from LinkedIn who I can't see on StreamYard, unfortunately, but glad you were able to join the stream. So Jenny asks, how did you find or select the 12,000 communities in the study?
Mm-hmm. So these are meetup groups, right, that we're working with. There was a first stage of selection based on geography, so geographical location. We study 15 large cities in the US. The list is shared in the paper. In case somebody is curious, I can share it with them. Mm-hmm. And 20-mile radius around the center of the city. So it's a pretty large area around the center of each city. That results into about more than 500 municipalities included in the study, which to date is one of the most comprehensive studies, geographically speaking, that includes a lot of these groups.
And now, why meetup.com, if you will, as opposed to something like Reddit, or even like taking several like large online communities together? Was it just a matter of sort of a collection of the data set was a good fit?
So Meetup was the ideal setting for a study about activities and events, because that's the purpose of the platform. They are, offering events since the start, and over time they have offered also these kind of digitized opportunities. So we noticed that on Meetup, people were already offering digitized events at the time that we started working on this paper. That was pre-COVID. I'm also working with Reddit data, but for other purposes. I noticed that it's not so easy to work on event kind of research questions on the Reddit in the Reddit setting.
That makes sense. We had another question actually from Pat Maher, who's going to be a guest next week, by the way. Pat asks, and what factors did you distinguish between these communities? Meaning, did you go into the study with some core factors or elements to these communities that would distinguish them?
I rely a lot on the categories of interest to distinguish the communities. We work with over 30 categories that are provided by Meetup. So we did not make a decision, to categorize some of the groups, but we relied on the ways that Meetup categorizes experiences into, as I said before, like sports, dancing, fitness, socialization, LGBT, all this very broad spectrum of interests is covered in the Meetup data. And that was also really nice because then we could distinguish the impact of digitization across all of these different categories of interest and across, all these different conditions. We track the same communities and the same members making decisions over 14 weeks of 2019. And so this was very helpful, both statistically and in terms of relevance of insights that we could produce.
So what stood out to me there, as you said, of 2019. So we've had obviously this cataclysmically bad event, happen in the meantime with the pandemic. how do you think your research might be affected if you were to reapply it today? Have you been looking at any of those kinds of questions? I'm sure it's occurred to you guys to talk about since all of this has happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So indeed, this research started pre-pandemics, and so something funny that happened, from all of this bad situation. Prior to this situation, people would ask me, who cares about online events? I mean, we don't do online events, so what should we care about it? But now
Suddenly
nobody
we
asks
care.
me anymore. Yeah, so at least I don't get that question anymore.
Right.
But I do get this other question that is, okay, the study is pre-pandemic, so what can you tell us about what's going to happen afterwards, or maybe what happened during the pandemics? How do your results extend to during and after the COVID crisis? And indeed, Jason and I really talked a lot about this, and we have thought about it. And we can see at least 3 scenarios that can explain how our results can apply to the COVID and post-COVID world. During COVID, people were, there was a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty about the situation. Information about the health situation was scarce and it was confusing. And so there was a lot of this kind of feeling of uncertainty, together with the fact that digitized tools were not as widespread as they are today. We think that the average negative effect that we found on digitization would at least be confirmed for the early part of 2020 and the pandemics. As the pandemics unfolded and we got more information about the health situation, but also about the virtual tools and about the digitization experiences, and we got, the Zoom overexposure, then this uncertainty reduced and the perception of risk reduced, and the familiarity with virtual tools increased. So the average negative effect, we suspect it would be mitigated, let's say between mid-2020, mid-2021. Now the situation is we're seeing some light with the vaccinations. We're seeing some light with small events being allowed again, in-person experiences being slowly allowed again. And so on the one hand, this average negative effect that was there pre-pandemics might be mitigated again because we are so familiar. We're like, yeah, this is fine. We can do this. We can participate in community activities even if they are virtual. But on the other hand, we think that there is another phenomenon going on, and that will be going on after the pandemics, and that is the in-person experiences will be valued maybe proportionally more than the virtual ones because they were negated for so long and we were prevented from having these meaningful in-person interactions for so long. Then maybe there will be less of a negative impact of digitization, but maybe a higher impact of offering in-person experiences because we may value them proportionally more going forward. This is what we have thought about so far.
That's very interesting. Was there anything that was indicated in your research about the nature or the delivery of the virtual events? And so I'll provide a little context around that question. I've been spending the past year sort of looking at different kinds of more immersive sorts of event platforms. So things like Roomkey, who I've worked with, which is basically a virtualized 3D. It's almost like a first-person shooter game, but they've created a more professional stage environment where you can give a keynote and you can have people in the audience asking questions, but you're basically virtualized into an avatar in those settings. And I've often felt those are more immersive sorts of settings that give you a sense of place, more so than a Zoom meeting where you feel disconnected from other people and physically separate. I don't know if any of those, maybe those questions came up, but you didn't have a chance to research them in the course of this, but I'm very interested in that as sort of an area. And I don't know if that's something that you guys have sort of thought through or even just talked about it on an informal basis. I'd be interested in your opinion.
So definitely it is something that we have thought about. We do not address this point in the meetup paper. The reason is that, so already measuring the extent of digitization of events was kind of a challenge. because
That's
there
big,
was no
right?
variable, right? There was no column in the data that tells us, well, this event is online and this event is offline. We had to work with text data, so we had to take the bulk of text that organizers use to describe the event and train machine learning models to detect the extent to which those descriptions were referring to digitized experiences. So already pretty challenging to even just say, okay, this is probably digital and this is probably in person. And even more challenging would be to distinguish, okay, this is digital and it is very interactive, or this is digital and it is, kind of broadcasting instead of interacting. So I suspect that with the data that we have, there will be more work required on the detection, machine learning part to understand if we can detect that kind of information. But for myself, this is one of my next research interests. So something that I would like to explore within digitized events. Is it the case that these kind of reactance to virtualization, is it mitigated by the kind of virtual event? Is it mitigated if you step into a hyper interactive environment? I am now in touch with some field partners who would like to explore this kind of research question and across digitized events see which one works best to encourage participation. And so this brings me to the next thing, is that I frequently work with companies and field partners who have an interest in answering questions that are relevant for their business, but that are also interesting for me as a researcher. And so we often just join forces, and I help them run studies that are statistically sound and that can deliver insights that are valuable. And at the same time, I can answer these kind of more profound research questions, like if we have a virtual event, what kind of virtual event will work best for which kind of audience?
That's fascinating, and it's great that you're maybe looking for those partners. I feel there's so much open space for us to collaborate between academic and professional interests. I think that we enrich each other in our experiences, and I'm glad to be able to have you on the stream to make people aware of the fact that we're looking for those kinds of bridges and understanding. I am really fascinated by that idea of sort of more immersive experiences, and I think I came at online communities early in my career around online games and sort of more immersive game environments. And I think that my experience, my personal experience, has been you go into those immersive spaces, you feel a sense of place. It's a liminal space where it changes mindset and offers opportunities to think differently. That's a very different experience than your run-of-the-mill video meeting call in Google Meet, or everybody picks on Zoom, but that's the one that took off. But all of those that are of that ilk, where it's just the Brady Bunch effect of like a bunch of squares on the screen and people talk, well, like we are right now. It's just not as immersive, or it's become almost sort of a commonplace from these other sorts of ways of experiencing online interaction, that are out there. So I'm eager to see what your next phase of research looks like, and if I can be of help with that, or if anybody in the chat wants to be of help with that, definitely get in touch with you. But I'm definitely interested. So
yeah, this is something of an open point in the community research, but also in general in marketing research and in consumer behavior research. So there is a lot of work ongoing about how consumers, in particular, as I work in marketing, how consumers are interacting with these digitized interfaces, also with like digital virtual sales assistants or sales interfaces. What if you make them more human? What if you make them more approachable? What if you make them sound more with a human voice? And they're experimenting with all of these different combinations to make consumers feel more comfortable in their consumption experiences. This also extends somewhat to communities, although I think the community settings are a bit more peculiar than just the consumption experience, in which is just you making a purchase decision. In communities, there is this baseline need for interaction, and it is a collective experience in which you gain more if you are connected with others and you network with others. And so it is a little bit different, but I would say the basic psychological phenomena that underlie these kind of decisions are shared also with consumer behavior research. So there is a lot of work going on in that area that I think we can borrow from, at least some insights we can borrow from.
I definitely take your point. We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, Rocco Haro, who's building a new application experience that really tries to replicate the idea of going into a communal room and networking with people in that room. So the opportunity for serendipitous meetings rather than having to go to a breakout room and having sort of artificial matchups between people, things that try to better simulate the serendipity of in-person, kinds of interactions. I think that's a new area for technology to get better at. So I'm fascinated by those changes. So another question about the research. Did you also look at sort of the intent to attend an event as opposed to actually attending the event when it's digitized? Was there anything you guys were able to find around that?
So we actually only look at the intention to participate.
Okay, so RSVP. I've RSVP'd for the event. Okay, got it.
Reason is that RSVPs they can be somewhat a more intense sign of commitment and of participation and respect of community norms, because it's easy and it's cheap to create an RSVP, but it's also really easy not to do anything. But not creating an RSVP is very harmful for the event organizer because they do not have a sense of who's interested, who's not, why are they not, can I reach them out if they're not. So if you don't RSVP, right, it costs nothing to you and it's not a big deal, but it may be a big deal for the event organizer and the community organizer. So we chose to focus on that part because it captures something on the spectrum of community participation that is it can be a little bit subtle, but very important. And also because actual attendance can be somewhat hard to measure because it depends a lot on the single organizer being able to report attendance on the meetup interface. And not all the organizers do that. So it would be a bit of an unreliable measure to work with. So this joined with the importance of RSVPs in community in management of the events led us to choose only participation intentions.
So that's a good takeaway. If you're setting up community events, always make sure you've got the RSVP set up so that you can track who's actually interested in it. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess sort of along the lines of that, and this may go beyond the research, and if you're not comfortable commenting on that, I'm fine with it. But were there any other kind of lessons or takeaways that you saw from looking at this large set of data about people setting up and running digitized events? Is there anything you can generalize as advice about a community manager that's trying to set up digitized events? Any success factors that you were able to intuit, from looking at the data that was there?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, try to inform people as much as possible in advance about what the event is going to look like, what is going to be the format, what are going to be the milestones during the event, what exactly are you going to do. A second factor is communicating popularity or quality of events. So I found that if there are many people on the wait list, so this is a kind of a signal of popularity. People are more likely to participate in digitized events. So if they see, this may be a good one. If so many people want to go and there is kind of a limit on it, probably it's a good one. Yeah.
So it creates some scarcity around. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It speaks about some, again, consumer behavior and psychology mechanism of scarcity and of exclusivity and status. This is speculation, by the way. We don't test these kind of theories, but it might be something like that, right? If you see that so many people are interested, well, maybe I want to go too.
Yeah.
So information for sure. So reduce the uncertainty, reduce the risk of people, of the perceptions that they have of uncertainty or risk associated with the online formats, and try to create a bit of a vibe and of appeal around the digitized experience that maybe will offset a bit the loss in this kind of social serendipitous exchanges that are lacking in these settings.
Well, those are terrific insights, and we've all too soon reached 30 minutes here, in the conversation. Just a couple of quick shout outs. I think we got a couple more comments that came through here. Jenny says that first factor is aligned with Priya Parker's principles for gathering. So that definitely resonated with her. And then there's a comment from Pat here. Marketing that's creating the buzz. Yes, absolutely, Pat. So I mean, I think some great practical takeaways from your research and from your experiences of going through this. I hope we can have you back again to talk more about your ongoing work, because it's fascinating, and I really appreciate the energy and care that you bring to what you're doing. And thank you for coming in and sharing your wisdom today on this stream.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Todd. This was great. I would be happy to be back and tell you more about my other projects.
Wonderful, wonderful. And in the meantime, if you're catching this stream on a replay, I encourage you to please like, share it. If you catch it up on YouTube, I would very much appreciate like, shares, and comments up there. And please subscribe to Clocktower Advisors as a YouTube channel. But meanwhile, for those of you peeps here on LinkedIn Live, we've got some great shows coming up next week. Monday, I'm excited to have as my guest Laura Perino, who is a longtime friend, and she's going to be talking about practicing empathy. She's actually worked in outplacement for executives for many, many years, and knows that community very, very well. And so she's going to be bringing in some of her things that she tells people and works with people who are often at their lowest point in their professional lives. And how do you build people up? How do you create that sense of empathy, understanding, and belonging for people that are going through troublesome times? So that's it for today. This kind of wraps up our week, and hope to see you next Monday at 11 a.m. U.S. Central Time. That's UTC -5 for those of you who are tuning in from elsewhere. And Martina, have a wonderful weekend. I hope you're doing something that's relaxing and fun. And
thank you so much. I'm getting the COVID vaccine, so very exciting.
Congratulations. That's terrific.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to having you back again on soon as guest, and maybe your co-author as well at some point soon.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you so much, Todd. Have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.